Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is defending his country's planned military takeover of Gaza City, even as that plan faces growing international condemnation. Netanyahu spoke by phone with Donald Trump about his intention to expand the war. And according to the Prime Minister's office, he thanked the U.S. president for his, quote, steadfast support of Israel. But the U.S. stands increasingly apart from allies, with more countries voicing their opposition to Israel's new war plan. Australia is the latest country to say it will recognize a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in September. Still, Netanyahu shows no signs of backing down.
I don't want to prolong the war, I want to end the war. Given Hamas's refusal to lay down its arms, Israel has no choice but to finish the job and complete the defeat of Hamas.
The staff of the network Al Jazeera is mourning the loss of colleagues killed in an Israeli airstrike. The Israeli military says it deliberately targeted journalist Anas al-Sharif, accusing him of leading a Hamas cell. The director of the Al-Shifa hospital says al-Sharif was in a tent marked with a press sign at the time of the attack. In all, 7 people were killed, including at least 3 other Al Jazeera journalists. Before his death, al-Sharif responded to Israel's accusation, saying he was a, quote, journalist with no political affiliations. Al Jazeera is calling the killing a desperate attempt to silence voices ahead of the occupation of Gaza. The Committee to Protect Journalists released a statement reading, quote, Israel's pattern of labeling journalists as militants without providing credible evidence raises serious questions about its intent and respect for press freedom. Journalists are civilians and must never be targeted. Those responsible for these killings must be held accountable. The CPJ says 186 journalists have been killed in Gaza in the last 22 months. CNN's Nada Bashir is following all of these developments and joins us live now from London. Good to see you, Nada. Can you tell me a little bit more about Anas al-Sharif? From what I understand, he anticipated the possibility that he could be targeted and killed by Israel, right?
Absolutely. He had indeed raised concerns over the threats and allegations that he had seen mounting by members of the Israeli military and other Israeli government officials who had highlighted and pinpointed Anas al-Sharif as a potential target. And as you mentioned, Ivan, we've been hearing those warnings around his safety and calls for his protection from others as well, including the UN Special Rapporteur for the Freedom of Expression, as well as the Committee to Protect Journalists. And in fact, Al Jazeera, the international media network, had also raised concern around the safety and protection of Anas al-Sharif, as well as his other Al Jazeera colleagues and other journalists on the ground in the Gaza Strip. And we had been hearing those mounting allegations from members of the Israeli military, including the IDF's Arabic spokesperson. This has been described by many as a smear campaign against the Al Jazeera journalist. They accused him of being linked to Hamas, in their words, quote, a terrorist. But of course, Anas al-Sharif has become a household name for many in the Arabic-speaking world, for many closely following updates on the ground on the situation in Gaza on social media. Anas al-Sharif, over the last 22 months, has been a constant source of information on the ground across the Gaza Strip. At the time of his death, he was, of course, in Gaza City. He was outside of the previously destroyed Al-Shifa hospital with other journalists, according to the hospital's director, Dr. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, in a tent clearly marked as a press tent. Now, this isn't the first time that we have seen these press tents in Gaza across the Strip being targeted in Israeli airstrikes. The Israeli military itself has indicated that this was a targeted strike against the Al Jazeera journalist as well as his colleagues. And we previously heard, as I mentioned, from the UN Special Rapporteur for freedom of expression, denouncing those allegations by the Israeli military as unfounded accusations. We've heard from the Committee to Protect Journalists, and we also heard from Anas al-Sharif speaking to the Committee to Protect Journalists, saying, I live with the feeling that I could be bombed and martyred at any moment. This feeling is difficult and painful, but it does not push me back. Rather, it motivates me to continue fulfilling my duty. And of course, as I mentioned, Anas al-Sharif was a crucial source of information in the Gaza Strip. As we know, international journalists have thus far not been permitted to access Gaza independently. And of course, Palestinian journalists on the ground have been a huge source of information and updates on the ground on the situation. Ivan?
And they appear to have been systematically targeted. If you can cite the numbers from the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 186 Palestinian journalists killed in 22 months of conflict in Gaza, some 90 others imprisoned. Nada Bashir, live from London, thank you very much for that update. Alon Pinkas is a former Israeli consul general in New York, and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Good to see you. It's been months since we last spoke. I wanted to get your sense. We're hearing about families of Israeli hostages and the Israeli political opposition calling for a general strike this coming weekend over the Israeli government's expanded war plans in Gaza. Will that make any difference?
Well, that depends on the size, the scale, and the sustainability of such an effort, Ivan. I mean, if it's a strike that's 1 day or 2 days, that's not going to have a big impact. If the strike is accompanied by demonstrations growing in size, from 10,000 to 30,000 to 100,000 and even more, and we've seen those in the past, so it's doable. If we see that on an ongoing basis, then it could change. Now, on top of that, these protesters and this opposition is backed by or emboldened is a better word here by the military's opposition, resistance, and reservations about the plan. And if you notice, or if our viewers have noticed, Mr. Netanyahu is trying to sell a non-existent plan by changing the terminology constantly in the last 48 hours. I mean, from occupation, it became a takeover. Takeover became a temporary military presence. Evacuation became partial evacuation. Occupation of Gaza became military control of central Gaza, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no real plan, yet the war is going to continue. That's a given. That's almost an inevitability. And against that background, that strike and those demonstrations are going to be held.
You know, as Prime Minister Netanyahu was defending his, as you've argued, evolving plan, I also heard that he was denying reports of starvation and malnutrition in Gaza. And I wanted to ask you, Mr. Pinkas, is that a widespread belief in Israel that these images and firsthand accounts and then the reports that have come from the health ministry in Gaza of at least 217 Palestinians, 100 of which are children, dying of malnutrition, do people in Israel believe that this is happening? Or, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, do they not think that this is actually taking place in Gaza?
That's a good question, and it's going to take a trained social psychologist, which I am not, to figure out whether or not people actually believe that there's no starvation, no malnutrition, no humanitarian crisis or humanitarian catastrophe, or they're living in denial, meaning that they sort of know that it's happening, but they choose to look the other way, denying that that Israel can ever be a part of that. But I'm seeing rather a dramatic change in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, from complete denial and being indifferent, oblivious, and ignorant about what's going on in Gaza. There's much more reporting on what is going on in Gaza. Now the question is this a policy, a deliberate policy? Is this done with an intention to starve? Or is this just incompetence, ineptitude, and a bad prosecution of the war? And of course, that depends on how you analyze this. But the public understands now what it chose to ignore for the better part of the last 6 months, that there is a humanitarian crisis, there is starvation, and that the prime minister is denying it. That's what he does. He usually tells you, believe me, not what your eyes are seeing. So what can I say? I cannot, even if I really try, defend what he's saying here.